Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Are You Afraid of the Dark? So, there's a whole 3 episodes in this season, and so I was trying to figure out how to just kind of break all these down. And, I was trying to think of, well, maybe I should do the whole season, maybe I should just do one episode, maybe what, I don't want to put too much effort into this to eventually just be like, why not just review one episode? See where this goes, and then eventually, if there's no interest into it, then I could just move on and do other things. Because really, from this very first episode, kind of tells me where this story is to reasonably be heading. And in all honesty, for this episode for line delivery and just story way of going about things seems very cringe and very super generic. There's this one part in this episode where immediately we have Rachel's mother who is to mention oh, this character looks like he's right off of a romance novel. And I'm like, so in other words, they basically tell you where they've basically stolen this whole entire show's idea from is any romance novel or any novel whatsoever, and basically just re-put it into the same thing because they're lazy as F as far as the writing goes for this show, in all honesty. I have seen, Are You Afraid of the Dark? I've seen the original one of this, where reasonably there was never much of a focus of the people who are telling these campfire stories. Really, it was just, okay, small intro here, and then small outro, and that's all the focus was of these people at this campfire. But now it seems cut much more of a 50-50 kind of split, where you end up having to show this story of this new girl who's to be Rachel, that eventually is going to join these campfire tales. And this story is super generic. And then eventually, once you actually get into the actual story, the supposed ghost story or nightmare story, it seems super generic, like they've kind of copied and pasted or stole this from something. And really, there isn't much of a good enough quality story here to justify that. Why should anyone watch this? This does not seem like a better improvement of the previous product. It's just slapping it out there again because it's hey, I'm sure a lot of people remember Are You Afraid of the Dark? So I'm sure people will just clamor onto this show because it's a reminder of their childhood. They're kind of really grasping at nostalgia. Plus, also, Nickelodeon just likes to retake certain kind of things, reboot them, because really it's a nostalgic thing, or it's really looking at Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They've kind of driven that into the ground, as well as stuff like Power Rangers that eventually gets pushed off to Hasbro and all kinds of other things. And they just kind of reboot things to eventually kind of fit a certain thing going on, where they're doing this right now just because it's Halloween, and so oh, they have to come up with some kind of Halloween show, and so they dig up this show to eventually have content. But this story is so uberly bland, it's ridiculous. It's basically they steal this from blatant any novel that you've ever. If you go into a an app of some kind, and you download any app that has a story in it, you'll probably find this story of what's going on in here in this show. You'll find it. It's easy. It's the stereotypical romance novel story, or just a story in general. And so, with that said, what is the story? What is this first episode about? Stereotypically. So, we have Rachel, who is to be this new girl in school. because that seems fresh. And I guess she had moved here, and so it seems like she's going and trying to eventually find friends. It seems that she's having a hard time getting her locker open, and so it seems that Rachel is to eventually be creative. It seems like she wants to draw things or put together some kind of story. And it seems there is to be this guy named Graham who takes an interest in her and then eventually is to be shoving notes into her locker, testing her about her kind of multiple choice knowledge of whether she would want to be in a haunted house or a cemetery, or would she like to be a ghost, or would she like to be a zombie, and all these kinds of other things. And like, it just gets to the point where I'm like, God, this is such a waste of time. Like, there is so much that feels like a waste in this episode, and I am just like, man, they are stretching this thing out like they just cannot, like, they're Armstrong stretching this out, hoping that eventually this thing is going to break for how long they're going to stretch this out. So all of a sudden, finally, this girl ends up getting this congratulations, you've passed weirdly this test, because either answer would have probably worked regardless. And so eventually they usher this girl into this secret society where they're all wearing hoodies and masks and whatever, and ushering this girl in to just like, okay, you're going to join us and you're going to tell us a scary story. And so this girl is to come up with this scary story that she's basically already built up in her mind way before this thing was to even be a thing, because obviously she has an idea for a story already. Like, I'm going to go over the other kind of severely generic stuff to kind of tell us a little bit about other characters in this show when eventually, like, things actually come up. But so eventually we end up having this Carnival of Doom story that's presented. And really, when we go through this Carnival of Doom story, I'm just like, okay, so, like, why were these people to go to this Carnival of Doom just for not everybody to be taken and disappear and whatever? Like, you would have thought everyone from this carnival would have been taken because that would be the mistake that they made. But instead, like, it seems like out of an entire thing of people that went to this carnival, seemingly only 2 people were taken? So that just makes a lot of sense, right? Out of the massive group of people, 2 whole people were actually taken. That just seems so dumb. And then eventually there's to be this, like, kind of cliffhanger thing to eventually tell you that, oh, like, this story, like, maybe these people that are putting together this story, something real is going to come after it after all. So yeah, so basically that's the breakdown of the story in a very teeing up like fashion. Go ahead and check it out if you. There's 3 whole episodes in Netflix. You can go ahead and check it out if you want. Probably watch the whole show in one fell swoop. Like, I just got lazy with it and I just was like, oh, okay, I'll just watch the first episode. And then I realized, like, the real quality or cringe of the episode. I'm like, yeah, I don't know about this show. Like, I don't think I'm getting a quality show. So with that said, let's just go into that double 5 time territory, because it's that customary time again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this first episode. God, I am so just sick of the lazy, like, just tossing out another thing that people are to have heard of to eventually just get views, clicks, whatever. Because that has just happened far too often now. It's getting ridiculous how we've just gotten to a point. and amassed to a point where it's just a clickbaiting thing nowadays to eventually just do shows and movies and whatever. It's not to just give a good quality product out where people are going to feel happy after XYZ thing is over. No, like it's basically just like, man, how can we just sucker people in and leave them kind of feeling like, yeah, like I hope they do something better with the following episode or the following season, or I hope they put some real money or some real thought into this show. Uh, because reasonably, that's what I kind of feel about this. Is it's just like, man, this sucks, and I hope it gets better. Because it's basically just to say it's a limited season or a limited series, and it's to be catered to be during October. So that immediately will tell us that this show will get quickly lost in the shuffle, and then eventually this show won't come out again. Because they'll just be like, yeah, like this was a mistake to put this out, and then a lot of people will like, well, yeah, because the quality sucked also. But so they're just putting this out there just for content because October time, and then eventually they're just gonna cancel this show anyways. Because what are they only gonna put this out one time a year? Like that tells you the real quality of it all. So let's go into this. So Rachel is to eventually be new girl in town, and so when Rachel is to go off to school, her mother is to say like, "Yeah, I'm really rooting for you," and I'm like, God, that is so cringe. Yeah, I'm really rooting for your success in the show, so that way I can keep my job. That's what I'm really saying here. God, what a cringy line delivery by this mother. Like, good God. So Rachel is to go off to school where she's having a really tough time getting her locker open. And so we end up having this guy who is to be Adam that is to try to help Rachel open up this locker. And so he bizarrely tries to like bash his shoulder into it to eventually just not have it open anyways. Like there's some goofy trick to unlocking a locker because I guess there always has to really be that. How about you just put the combination in and open up the little door opener thing, and oh wow, locker opens. Like I don't know why there has to be a goofy trick now to unlocking a lock. It's just wasting time. So Rachel is to eventually go on into this one class, and we immediately see Graham, who is also coming into school also, where I think he was going to get a football tossed into his face, but luckily Graham is to dance out of the way to get some other jock to be hit in the head with this football. Like, hey man, what did you do that for? It's like, well, I was going to nail the dancing kid that bizarrely is to come in and like listen to music and whatever and be dancing it out. What a goofy way to introduce a kid. Plus, you had to really make this guy really stand out compared to everyone else, which that was kind of garbage to me. So, eventually, Graham is to, I guess, be this germaphobe, which I'm like, I don't know if I really buy that because just slapping some Purell on your hands doesn't seem to make you a germaphobe. If this guy was really a germaphobe, he would be like wiping down like his desk before he sat on it. Like we would have this guy really just like stretching out the time of just having to clean something because he's a germaphobe. But I guess that's just me, right? So I don't know. What do I know? Like I don't think we really cement this guy being a real legitimate germaphobe. But I don't know. I guess that's just me. So, anyways, Graham has had this shirt that says, like, I watch horror movies, and I'm like, God, if we don't have, like, the most stereotypical... we just have to have the most stereotypical people in this show. How deliciously stereotypical, or typical, typical isn't a word. Typical. So eventually we push on, and so Rachel is to be dumping this note of her like doodles that is to say Mr. Top Hat, and so Graham is to desperately dive into this trash can to get this sketch out there of Mr. Top Hat, and he's like, "Oh my god!" So Graham ends up going to this one girl, who I believe is to be. It doesn't really matter. I think it might be Louise. Anyways, pushing on. So, so what ends up happening is that, so Graham is talking to this one girl about, like, ooh, Rachel, like, she has, like, this dark thing about her. I don't know what it is. And so eventually they keep leaving her notes in her locker, having a multiple choice test where, like, what's scarier, a werewolf or a vampire? And so the girl ends up saying, it's like, well, obviously vampire, because vampires are always, like, always being who they are. Like, werewolves are only scary during a portion part of it. So we have this multiple choice thing that is just the simplest thing that you could ever put out to just ask anybody about horror stuff. So this is going on for like 20 years. This girl is getting these notes. And so every time she's so excited about getting this note. And so eventually she gets a congratulations thing to just say like, hey, you have joined the Midnight Society. So eventually we're going to come and have you go to this forest, and we're going to put a bag over your head and then take you to this campfire. And because eventually she ends up winning the first round of these people tossing a bag over her head. And so the next time around they're telling her, it's like, oh, well, you need to put together this story. And so of course Rachel ends up tossing together this story that she already had in her head because she's been having nightmares about, I guess, this Mr. Top Hat, which I guess garners the opening sequence of this film. So Rachel is to easily put together this whole story, which actually doesn't feel all that creative of a story, but I guess that's just me. Like, this is kind of like Night Books quality. Like, when really looking at this show, I was like, man, people should go ahead and watch Night Books, because it feels like the exact same thing. So Rachel is to go and to tell these people this story of the Carnival of Doom. And so what ends up happening is this little girl, and here's the funny thing. The characters in this story have no name. They're just called Story Girl, Story Mother, Story Father. I'm like, wow, what a, like, the only person that actually has a name in this is the villain of the story. I'm like, wow, that just whatever, I guess, with this story. Well, that's what IMDb says. Like, I don't know if the actual show actually gave them a name. So we end up having this little girl and the two parents go off to this carnival. And so we end up having this this clown ticket taker guy, who is to eventually go and give this kid and these parents tickets. And then all of a sudden we find out that this guy has these glasses that he can flip up and flip closed. So, like, this is just like we're going back to like the 1980s or something like that, from like a different world or something like that, where the one guy is to specifically have those glasses that go up and down for whatever reason. And so this clown is to pop his glasses up, and we end up seeing that he supposedly has no eyes. And so they're like, oh my god, this clown had no eyes? Wow, that's crazy. So eventually the daughter is to mention to her parents, hey, that clown had no eyes. Let's go back there and let's see if he has no eyes still. And the parents are like, well, I'm sure he won't. Yeah, I'm sure. So the parents go back to this clown, is like, hey, can we see your eyes? And he's like, well, sure. He ends up popping the glasses back up to showcase that he has normal eyes. I'm like, wow, we are just so wasting time with this show. But then they go back into the show, and so we end up having supposedly this circus performance that has no circus performance whatsoever. Because you would think if you went into a tent and you would go into a room that looks like a circus performance or a freak show or something like that, you would get something much more beyond just Mr. Top Hat coming out and just saying repetitiously, enjoy the show, because that's all he does. There's no act here. They're like, what did they pay for? Did they pay to get into the carnival? Is that what they rationally paid for? I'm so confused. So, anyways, so we have Bartholomew go and do the announcing for the arrival of Mr. Top Hat. I'm like, wouldn't Mr. Top Hat be the announcer of everything, and then they would have some act? I am like, so what now? Like, you have to have an announcer for the announcer? Why waste that kind of time? Again, the Stretch Armstrong of this show. So, Bartholomew is to announce, oh, okay, hey, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have Mr. Top Hat come out. So Mr. Top Hat all of a sudden comes out and is to basically repetitiously just say, like, it's all part of the show. That's all he says, really. And he also tells people, like, what they're in store for, rides, food, fun, whatever. And eventually, all of a sudden, all the lights end up turning off. And so then the lights turn back on. And so all of a sudden, like, Mr. Top Hat is right behind the girl who is to be the focus of the show. And then the girl ends up getting scared. And so Mr. Top Hat is like, hey, you might as well save that for one of the rides. Yeah, like, because it's all part of the show. And then eventually at the very tail end of the episode, we have to reiterate that line again. It's all part of the show, folks. It's all part of it. How many parts of it could we part our way into saying the same line? Because then we have to, like, letter it all down into 5 things. It's all part of the show. Oh! It's all part of the show. Oh! So after this whole thing is to be showcased, everybody's running off to go and have fun at this carnival. And so all of a sudden the girl is like, you know what, I need to tinkle, I need to wee, I need to pee, I need to take a huge jump. And so the girl is to go off to supposedly the bathroom to eventually find Mr. Top Hat playing around with a bunch of scorpions for whatever reason, and it seems weirdly that a bunch of scorpions are coming out of his pant leg and shirt whatever thing, and I'm like, God, this is so random. And so eventually the girl is to see Mr. Top Hat with scorpions coming out of his pants, and so she's like, well, is this part of the show? And then so all of a sudden, like, Mr. Top Hat is like, well, I thought you liked getting scared. And then all of a sudden the girl is to run off to eventually bump into these 2 girls. And so the 2 girls are like, well, I want to see what she was so scared about. So they end up walking off to eventually vanish forever. And then so eventually the girl is to go home the next day after this whole carnival thing is to happen. And weirdly enough, her parents have no recollection of them ever going to this carnival. And so on the news, there's to be, like, 2 girls missing. And it seems like this girl is the only one that remembers them going to this carnival. But then supposedly she ends up over time forgetting about it too, because I guess she eventually grows up. because I'm assuming it's one of those where it's like only the kids will remember the carnival, because really Mr. Top Hat really just wanted to go after the kids. He didn't care about the adults, so the adults were just going to forget about this whole experience. So eventually that was the story. And so at one point we have accidentally one person end up yelling the word Graham to Graham, because it's like, hey, like, stop messing up the story, Graham. And then Rachel's like, oh, Graham? And then Graham is like, oh, well, it's a different Graham. Like, I'm sorry, they wasted so much time putting masks on these characters for no reason. Like, eventually they were going to reveal who they were to Rachel anyways, so you might as well just, you should have sped that up. So we also had it where Rachel was eventually to kind of meet her neighbor Gavin, and so Rachel's mother is to look at Gavin and is to say, like, oh, look at this guy, like, he looks straight out of a romance novel. Isn't that right, Rachel? And so kind of telling that both Rachel and Gavin are probably going to be connected together as having a relationship, because I guess you have to stereotypically like put a circle into a circle hole kind of thing. So Rachel is eventually waiting till everyone gets unmasked, and Rachel's assumed that the last person who is to get unmasked is to be Adam, but instead it's actually Gavin. And Gavin's like, wait a minute, you didn't think it was going to be me in the part of this society? And Rachel's like, well, I don't know, like, all you boys look the same. So, uh, so eventually Rachel and Gavin are to be going into this boat, like, just rowing away, and so they're just to like talk things out and just talk more about one another. And so after that moment is to happen, we are to showcase what is to go on with Adam, the guy that I guess they didn't care about this Midnight Society thing. So Adam is to supposedly go and walk his dog to eventually have his dog kind of carry him to this carnival, and then all of a sudden his dog is to vanish into this carnival. Adam is to go after his dog in this carnival, and supposedly the dog returns, but Adam doesn't. And so all of a sudden there's now a missing persons about Adam, and so all of a sudden Rachel is to head on to school, and so all of a sudden we have the teacher who is to come on here and to tell all of us, hey, it seems like Adam has gone missing. Oh, what a horrible thing. But hey, guess what? You guys are going to go and have some fun soon, because look at this new event that's coming to our town. And all of a sudden it's the Carnival of Doom, and like they have a ticket thing for that. And so Rachel's turning to Graham and she's like, oh my god, my story came true. Ah! And then that's how like the episode really just ends. And all of a sudden we have Mr. Top Hat that comes back and he's like, it's all part of the show. And then that's how the show ends. I'm like, so in other words, are they going to take this one story and make it the whole season? If they seriously do, I'm going to be like, God, that is like the laziest thing that you could possibly do. They better like have a different story in every episode, because if they keep to this one story, I'll just be like, wow, like, so they did nothing like Are You Afraid of the Dark, where they bottled the one thing into every episode, where I'm sure this one they're going to stretch it out, or eventually maybe all the stories will eventually combine into one another, and that would be interesting. But I'm assuming it's not really going to go that way. I'm assuming that they're going to stretch this one story out, and it's going to be like, man, like, you done wrong. You done wrong. So, with that said, I think I'm gonna get the heck out of here. I don't know if I'm really interested in this show or not. The quality is just not impressing to me. Because why would it be? It's a Nickelodeon show. Uh, Very rarely do they appease like a certain audience. Uh, I think there's probably a reason why on Netflix Goosebumps is like trending right now because I think people really wanted a really good Are You Afraid of the Dark and they had to settle with something that just was like nostalgically better and had a better story, which Goosebumps delivers that, and Are You Afraid of the Dark doesn't. Plus, it's a mini series; it's a limited series, so why would anybody really want to invest in this? Uh, Plus, we also let's talk about this because I didn't. Uh, Akiko is to be this girl that evidently is putting some zombie movie together in this episode, and so she ends up having a brother that's kind of this like police officer, and so it seems like whatever this girl wants to do, she can get away with it because her brother is to be a police officer. And like I eventually naturally assumed that this girl was going to be a part of the Midnight Society as well as Graham. Um, but then it also seems like we have like Gavin, who we might need to know a little bit more about, or the other girl that was to be presented in this Midnight Society. We needed to know a little bit about her. We know too much about Rachel. Hopefully, they focus on other people, or hopefully they do a different story because I don't want to just have this tied to the Carnival of Doom, which was just a crappy story, anyways. So, like I think I covered most of the episode, and if not, like oh well, like there'll be a rebuttal coming in episode 2 if I decide to do that. If people are interested in this, so I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.